The views and opinions of this broadcast do not reflect the views and opinions of Armed Media, New Productions and its affiliates. Enjoy the show.
Armed Radio. I am your host, Professor Jamie Lynn, and tonight my co-host, Andy. What is it with sports? It'll be an interesting conversation. It's saying can't broadcast. Oh no, again. There's already a guest. Okay, hold on. We're going to be talking about sports. So female version perspective versus the male perspective. And this is always an exciting topic for me. I was a Division I athlete in high school, college. I definitely push the limits and see the positive side to sports. I've got brothers, tons of them, my father, everybody loves sports. And so what is it with sports? What is the positive? What is the negative? What are the different circumstances that surround the positive outcomes and the negative outcomes? I'm having again, what is going on with technology? So I'm just going to kick it off with what is it with sports? And historically, obviously, sports have been around since humankind. Hello.
Well, hello.
Well, hello. Sports have been around forever. I was just getting to the topic at hand of what is it with sports and looking at the human mind and why we are competitive in nature and the positives and the negatives that contribute to the benefits of sports, but then also it can go really negative where we can develop gambling habits and whatnot. But please, Mr. Andy Cookman, introduce yourself for all of our guests.
First, thanks for having me on and asking me to do this. My name is Andy Cookman, as she said, and currently right now live in Northwest Arkansas, Bentonville area. If there's anything else you want to know, just type up a question, comment. Hey David, hey everyone. So
talk a little bit louder if you can. I've got my handy dandy Yeti here. But I just want to make sure your volume is up for all of our guests to hear. It's a little bit better.
Pretty low?
Yeah, just a little bit.
I'll speak up. I don't have the fancy microphones.
Thank you for putting your makeup on, by the way.
Glad to do it. I hope the lighting's right. I've been working on the lighting too today, so.
It's completely awesome. Thank you. So sports. So what is it with sports? I first developed my passion with sports, I think, earliest childhood memories. I grew up with brothers, so I remember trying to put on cartoons or girly things and was told that, the TV was owned by the men in the house, in particular my dad and my brothers, and that if I was going to live in the household, I had to like sports or get out. Is that the case?
That's a rough household.
I know. Yeah, they're pretty rowdy. I mean, my brother almost became, he was scouted and was on his way to being a professional athlete when he got injured. I had a cousin that was signed for the Mets and actually on his way to spring training was killed in a car accident. So that was pretty devastating.
Wow.
My mom in Texas, who's, pilot for American, she's very athletic. I got a lot of my athleticism from the women in my family as well. What about you? Where did sports start for you?
Oh, wow. Sports started pretty early. My dad, he got me into baseball. That's my first love. So he coached. He was assistant coach of one of my little league teams. I did that for a year or so. But just from then, it just kind of, I enjoyed the competitiveness of it. So
I mean, that right there is, I think, the first positive aspect, right, Andy? Like when your parents are involved and they're coaching you, and it's a nice
Right.
interaction for parents.
Yeah, it is. It is. It was always nice to have my dad there, talking to, and I knew he was there on the sideline, not just watching, but he was there and he was giving insight how to be better. Now, he is not a professional athlete by any means. He played some sports in high school, maybe not even high school, but he played some sports. But he just encouraged me to follow and do whatever. Kind of follow and do whatever I like to do, whatever sports attracted me. We did a little football for a few years. That was more for the camaraderie to kind of, play on the city team and get to know other people, other kids in the city, as well as it didn't hurt that one of my best friends growing up played on the team with me as well. So it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, so that's one of the other positive aspects of sports, right, is the camaraderie. But it can be double-sided because if you're not good at sports, a lot of people aren't necessarily innately gifted and athletic, and yet they still want to play. They still want to enjoy the competitiveness and then themselves. So you can have the aspects of sports where you have the camaraderie and you're learning and you're developing your self-esteem, but at the same time, for some people, it can go the opposite way and develop a low sense of self.
Exactly. It's easy to get discouraged with in sports, especially if you're not good. For baseball, you're striking out all the time. Golf, you never, it takes a long time to learn how to get everything and the mechanics right. But so it's very easy to get discouraged. I think if you have a good network around you, then and you're doing it for the right reasons, then it's easy to kind of overcome that obstacle of getting down on yourself. The competitive nature, if it kind of drives you to work on your swing, work on your fielding, and be better, be as best as you can be. But yeah, the competitive side is a negative and a positive, for sure.
When you mentioned golf, I mean, there's a difference too in sports. Some people would consider dancing a sport, or like you said, golf, when it's individualized, you're competing against yourself. And there's that dichotomy between the two, is you're competing against yourself, your own internal dialogue, but at the same time, David says he can't hear you. Oh, I'm in the clubhouse. And Gus wants to tell us a dirty joke. Gus, tell us a dirty joke.
Gus has a lot of them. You've got 4 of them now, Gus?
Any sports related dirty
and David,
jokes?
it's not a Gators hat, buddy. You know me better than that.
So back to what I was saying before I was sidetracked. I like getting the questions; they're fun. It's the internal dialogue. Do you have any stories or recollections of like the negative internal dialogue that it developed for you?
Oh wow, I'm sure there are. That wasn't on my prep sheet of questions that you sent over, so I wasn't prepared for that one.
That's the beauty of improv, improvisation, when you're just going at
right.
it.
Right. Yeah,
I'll be
that's
vulnerable.
a tough
I remember
one.
my first one was I'm not good enough. I think, when
Right.
you strike out, I played softball, like I'm not good enough, or the topic for me lately has been judgment from other people, and not like, what do they think about me? And especially in sports, where most sports people are watching you, and so you're developing an internal dialogue. So that's like my vulnerable story on, like if I strike out, or
Right.
if you miss a ball and you don't catch a ball, or if you're shooting a goal and you don't hit the goal, or if you're in football and you're second string and you never even see the field. We constantly have dialogues running throughout our human psyche.
Yeah, it's I think the earliest for me was, I remember trying out for my basketball team. I was 8th grade, but it was small school, so we only had one. We had a varsity team, so that was it. And I tried out and I missed it. Didn't make the team. And I was in tears pretty much, and talked to my coach, who was also one of my teachers, and went to our school or church with us. was also one of my youth leaders, so felt pretty confident that he wasn't doing it to be mean to me or anything. But he just said, "Hey, you're not good enough at this aspect," but he did break down the aspect and said, "Here, work on this, try this, develop this part of the game, and then come back next year." So, which is what happened. So from then on, 9th through 12th grade, played. I think it's all about, you mentioned about being embarrassed when people are watching. That has a big play on it too. And I remember I put a lot of pressure on myself to make the right play, to make the right decision. And I found myself worrying almost too much about what other people thought on if I missed it. Are they going to stop talking to me if I missed a game shot, or if I let a ball go through my legs or something? So, that's one of the things you got to deal with.
Do you have any stories about embarrassment recently? I was with my mentor, Simon Lavelle, earlier today, and I had to share my deepest, darkest worries and embarrassments and judgments about dialogue that had developed or issues that I had transpired with. And that was like super hard because I have a persona, in my professional world, my personal world, that we don't just go around really sharing our vulnerability, our deepest, darkest thoughts that I think we all have. So you got any good embarrassing stories?
Oh, wow. I try not to put myself in situations where I can be embarrassed. I'm almost too cautious to that extent because I overanalyze and I'm overthinking about what people are going to say or do, how they're going to view me. So I do my best not to put myself in that situation. But I'm sure there's plenty of embarrassing moments. I just can't think of any right now. Nothing that really humiliated me. Nothing recently. There was. This wasn't sports related, but years and years ago, in my early teens, helping our church break down a show that we did at the church, and lift something up, and it just comes tumbling over and knocks over the drums, knocks over $10,000 worth of equipment, and I just ran, and the place was packed, still full of people looking, staring at me. So I've got 600 people staring at me. But it was, I had encouraging people around. So if you can surround yourself with the encouragers, they'll help you take any embarrassing moment and just turn a positive light on it and encourage you and say, hey, look, don't let that stop you. So
I remember when I was in 8th grade. What? Can you see the comments?
Yeah.
How about that one time Katie dumped you and you cried? You cried like a little baby.
Yeah. Especially she's a midget.
I remember in 8th grade. What? I remember in 8th grade, I was so competitive in softball, and I grew up in a neighborhood where it was fairly competitive. We were Division I schools, and a lot of the guys on the male side went on for full rides into like universities like USC and UCLA, and again, I'm a California girl, so I thought it would be cool if I could play boys baseball because softball had become kind of easy in that regard. I mean, I played travel ball, and one of my moms coached my team, and I thought, I want to play boys baseball. So my moms love to tell this story because they said I couldn't play because I was a girl. So my moms went to the city council and said that that it was discrimination or whatever. And so we won, and I was in the newspapers, and I remember, people following the story. And when I got to the dugout with the boys, I walked in, I had my purse, I had my makeup, and I had my childhood boyfriend, who was my boyfriend in junior high all the way through high school. And I walked into and it was probably one of the most instrumental turning points in my life that shaped me. Sports really shaped me. And I sat in the dugout and all the guys were on that side and they were pissed, right? Like nobody wanted the girl to play ever. It was like their sport. And my first game was against my boyfriend and his team. And so I'm in the dugout, nobody's talking to me. So I pull out my purse and I get my lipstick and I put my lipstick and I'm thinking it's funny, right? And then I pull out the candy. Werther's Originals. I remember pulling out the Werther's Originals and the sunflower seeds. And all of a sudden, the boys were like, and they flocked right over to me. They were like, can we have some? Can we have some? And of course, I was like, oh, okay, that was easy. You know, they say,
they
show
can be
boys
bribed.
Candy and they'll, yeah. And it was fun. I got up to bat and I like, you know, it was scary, but those scary moments in life, those embarrassing moments in life that take you up to the next level. And I remember hitting the ball straight to my boyfriend and he caught it and I was out. And it was fun. You know, it was like one of those memories that you'll never forget. So who's Gus? Right. And he keeps counting something you're doing, like 5, 6, 7, 8. Like, what is he counting?
Gus, I don't know what he's counting. I think he's trying to, I don't know. He's practicing counting. He's
Gus,
a little slow.
What are you counting?
He wears a helmet.
Gus is a little slow?
Everywhere he goes, so. Yeah, he's a little slow. He's an old friend back from the East Coast.
Oh, I know what he's counting. He's counting your.
Oh, that might be it.
Yeah, because I just saw. Was that 9 times?
I don't know. He's counting. Now Brandon's counting.
Yep. Did you develop that playing sports? Where did that habit start?
I'm just happy they know how to count. So, oh man, it did come from kind of baseball. But I smoked a whole heck of a lot through high school and on until probably three years ago. And so when I quit smoking, I just started doing a dipping a lot more. So that's my
from one
story.
habit to the other.
Yeah. What can you do?
So do you gamble? Do you gamble?
10. I do. I've got my online sites pulled up right now. I've got a couple of bets I'm waiting to hurry up and finish. I just won one. I'm waiting 2 more have got to finish. So we'll see.
Okay, so describe that.
I love gambling. It's great.
What is it with that? What is it about?
A pastime. I don't know about the psyche. As far as I think,
pastime, you could do other pastimes. You could be reading your Bible or meditating or doing yoga or going to the gym or shaving the beard.
You're right. But there's some pastimes that I choose to not do so I can have time for gambling. It's not a whole heck of a lot. I think I think from the guy's perspective, guys always like to be right, don't we? We're always right. So
I think that's a human emotion. I like to always be right.
What?
That's a human emotion. I like to always be right. Do you really think that's a gender-specific personality trait, being right?
I think you find that trait more in men. I think men are, at least in my experience in talking to other guys, women, they may want to be right, but they won't push the point. They won't beat a dead horse, so to speak. So that's...
I don't know.
That's why I believe that I think men are a little more aggressive on the being right aspect.
I think that's what it is. I think that men are more aggressive in being right, but I think that women still like to be right. In my experience as a therapist and treating couples, the women want to be just as right as the men. And that I think what you said is probably more accurate, is the way and the means that they go about it. But how does being right have to do with gambling over sports?
Well, when we make the right pick, we're rewarded with money. So it reinforces.
Is there logic to that?
I don't know. You're the psychologist.
I don't know. I mean, in school, I could tell you why they say gambling, especially with sports, is so rewarding. It's called interval reinforcement. You have different types of reinforcements. Like you have continuous reinforcement, and then you've got interval reinforcement. And for whatever it is in the, not just in humans, but in tests with animals, lab rats and birds or, monkeys, whatever species we're studying, interval reinforcement tends to be the most positive and obsessive, because you're looking for the high of to make up for the times that you lost. There's something about the high.
Yeah. Oh, there's definitely a rush. Now, I don't bet big enough to really get a big high reward. However, a few months back at the Floyd Mayweather, who did he fight? Conor McGregor fight. One of the guys at a friend's house in LA, and he had some other wealthy friends over, and a guy showed me a betting ticket. Somebody put down $880,000 bet to win $1 million. That would be a pretty big high. I can see how that it's like a drug. It can be addicting, very addicting like that. So, and just like with a drug, you're chasing that next high. So, and I can't tell if you're freezing up or if you're just not talking.
Sports? I'm listening.
What would I say to people who are not into sports?
Yeah, like I've had the gamut of, from the female perspective, I've dated men that are heavily into sports to where it's annoying, it's consuming, and that is a common complaint I hear of in couples therapy, men being over involved or their time focused on sports, which women would consider irrelevant. I've had people explain it like, what's the fun of watching the ball go back and forth, and who cares who the first draft pick is, and you're so proud of your team, you just wear the jersey all the time, like, and so right. And then I've dated guys that are not into sports at all, and they frankly think sports are stupid.
I don't know. For those that don't like sports, I'm sure they have their own vice that takes their time, and just as a sports fanatic could constantly talk about sports all the time and piss off their significant other, I'm sure those that are non-sports enthusiasts have their own vice of gardening or I don't know, collecting cats. Who knows? Just something that fills that void for them. So, man, we got a whole reunion on here.
Apparently, they want to go have beer after. What do you?
Well, they got to fly out here.
Do you think that there's a high correlation to sports enthusiasts and alcohol?
Oh, that's a good question. I would probably say yes. Look at any event, any sporting event. There's always, who are their big sponsors? I mean, it's alcohol beer companies. So, right. So it's. I wouldn't know why. I wouldn't know why there would be a correlation there, but at least in Texas, I know
it's kind of paradoxical.
Everything is right. You're right. I'm saying in Texas, when I first moved out there, one of the first things I learned was they organize every event around drinking time. We had in my first probably 2 or 3 years out there, we had 2 funerals and 3 weddings, and every one of them, you get the text of, hey, we're drinking before over here, or we're doing this. So it could be regional. So, a Texas thing that a lot of people drink. Maybe they drink up north because it keeps them warm. Who knows?
I think that there's I just was thinking about college. Like, there's even sports that are drinking sports. Like, we didn't have beer pong when I was in college. But we had King's Corner, where we played a lot of drinking games in the fraternity and the sorority houses.
King's Corner, never heard of that one. Is that like
That was
Foursquare with
fun.
a big bouncy ball?
Yeah, I can't even remember what it was. I just remembered that we played with cards, and if you lost, you poured into the alcohol pot, and then whoever lost had to drink all of it.
Oh, yeah, I remember a game like that. I can't remember, but the name of it. Uh,
Yeah, I think isn't
but yeah,
I
yeah.
read somewhere like the NFL or one of those sports, like just sports in general, is one of our highest revenue sorts in the United States. And when I went to Hong Kong, I learned in Hong Kong that horse racing was the most popular. Like the Jockey Club owns a lot of Hong Kong, and in Asia they're like huge into. I didn't even think about that, sports that involve animals.
Yeah, that's for me. I have to drink to be around animals.
What?
It's. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I love them. I just can't be around them too much. I get allergies, and it's gets me stopped up. So, but yeah, I mean, what do you think the need? Do you feel that people have a need to drink at sporting events, or is it more of a social? Hey, because we're here together. Um, that's why they're drinking, just as a social construct.
I think drinking in general is a social construct in our country. Everything is a lot. If you're a drinker, I'm not a drinker anymore. I quit drinking over a year ago, and I realized once I got free of all that mindset that almost everything our family did surrounded around alcohol. Like you said, funerals, any excuse to get
Mm-hmm.
together was around a drink. So I think that alcohol in general in our society is just prevalent across the board to, a social construct to have fun, Thirsty Thursdays, Taco Tuesdays. Like
Right.
there's always something involved in drinking. And when I went to the Middle East, it was very, congratulations, Adam Gray.
Good
When I
job,
went to the
Adam.
Middle East, yes. And I was in Qatar and Doha and those countries. It was very interesting to see that liquor wasn't allowed. What I found out was very difficult for me because those were my drinking days, was being able to find where I could get liquor, and realized at that point it like slowly crept up on me that I had a drinking issue when I felt like I had to have alcohol and I couldn't withstand when I was, thousands of miles away in a different continent. And I learned that in the
Mm-hmm.
Middle East, if you're American, you can actually drink. They have American designated hotels, and those are the only places you can drink. So when I learned that, I found that the Middle Easterns were sneaking into those places, and bootlegging was still very popular, of all sorts, not just alcohol but drugs. That their black
Wow.
market was so huge in that area, but they don't, orientate their lifestyles around drinking. But sports were still pretty big there. Again, soccer, horses. They had the interesting. I forget the name of the bird. It's like almost like a hawk. There's a name for him. Like some of the Middle Eastern
Like for
plains
falconry?
is named after the. What is it?
Are you talking about like falconry?
Falcon? Yeah, that was like
Falconry.
a huge sport. Was something like that. I know they have another name
Right.
for it, but that was really, really big in the Middle East. And I think it's just
Mm-hmm.
a pastime. I think it's a pastime, but going back to the subject, I really believe in sports. I believe in the shaping of the behavior and obviously keeping yourself fit. I think we have a decline in sports because of video games now and television. I mean, obviously we have
Mm-hmm.
an obesity problem, and I think that we're going to keep seeing a decline.
Right. Well, you're right, Gus. African American market is more PC. Thank you for that. Instead of your black market
Actually,
comment.
we can talk about that when you're done. There are sports are culturally surrounded by ethnicity. White men
Yeah,
can't
yeah.
jump.
We'll get into that.
Black folk can't
Right.
swim.
Uh, what did you say? Fat people can't swim?
Black people can't swim. They have a
Oh,
phobia of
okay.
swimming, and I actually did a research paper on athleticism and African Americans. I looked at a Darwinian perspective my freshman year in college on slavery and how there was a link to the epigenetics of the African American population, that the reason that they were stronger, they grew taller, and that they had more muscle retention and athleticism, as well as the corresponding fear of water, was dated back to the slavery days, because African Americans weren't obviously native to America, so the only ones that were surviving the ship over were the strong. So it was a survival of the fittest, but what it also did was created in their generations a fear of swimming, because they only came over on boats, and they watched their fellow ancestors die from drowning or being thrown over in water. So I thought that was a very fascinating paper I did. It was also cross-correlated to the prison population and why, such a large percentage of Black people are in prison.
You froze up. Are you there?
Are you there? Are you there?
I'm here. Gus, what extra
Did you
muscle
hear
do they
anything I
have?
said? African Americans, they
Most
have
of
great
them.
muscle tone.
Right. Gus is making a claim they have an extra muscle.
What
I'd like to
muscle
see
is that?
the diagram of that one. I don't know. Well, hey, kind of on the alcohol thought though is, do you think alcohol plays a big role in sports? Is it just in America or is it worldwide? Because of how other countries view alcohol, where we're raised that you can't touch it until you're 21, and it's a taboo thing, which is why I think college students typically, that's where you get a lot of the abuse of the alcohol, because they're finally free. They're out of their parents' house, and so I'm wondering if that's just an American thing of putting that extra drive on alcohol.
I think it's everywhere, especially Latin countries. If you think about Latin America, like Latin, South America, North America, related countries like Mexico, obviously. I think it's culturally surrounded around alcohol. But
do they have drinking? Are there drinking ages?
No.
Are there drinking limits for those places?
They don't have a drinking age.
Okay.
But I have read studies that look at alcoholism in terms of drinking age, and it's scattered. I don't think that there's a uniform data collection. So when you look at Europe, like Britain and France and Italy and those countries where there isn't really a drinking age, they do tend to have a less alcohol rate. But same thing when you look at countries like Mexico and Central America, like Ecuador and Nicaragua, and they don't have a drinking age, but they have a high alcohol rate. So I don't think alcoholism is really correlated to culture and the drinking age based off of the data. I think it's more related to what you call in psychology learned helplessness. And learned helplessness does sometimes tie into that concept of sports and the concept of gambling that we talked about. Is when they did early studies like Pavlov and Skinner and those doctors that studied learned helplessness, Watson, some of those famous doctors that led some of the psychological research, it looked at if you were conditioned over time that you weren't good enough, or if you tried something you failed. They took dogs and shocked them every time they tried to jump over a net, that they developed learned helplessness. They stopped trying, if you will. And then that learned helplessness correlates very heavily to alcoholism. And I think what sports does is kind of provides a little bit of hope back into people, where they can vicariously live through different sports teams, different athletes. If they don't have that within themselves, then they look and they kind of idolize a sports figure, if you will, or that if they can't play a sport, then they follow a sport, they gamble on a sport. But I really think a lot of the research on at least alcoholism correlates more to your internal sense of self, like where are you at in your mental state.
That's very well put.
Well, thank you.
So yeah, I think we're in the 20s now.
Are you like watching your sports as we do this show? Is that what you keep looking at? Waiting for your
I've got a
results
screen
to
up
come in?
here. Well,
What
yeah,
is
some of them
fantasy
are in, but
football?
a waste of
What is
time and
fantasy
money.
football?
Um,
I don't know if the
it's
fantasy football followers would say that.
well, I had to stop playing just because I suck at it. I'm not good at picking the teams. I don't follow the leagues that I played in. These guys, like tomorrow night is the first night of the NFL draft. And it's being held in Dallas. I had a boss once that he would record the draft and record all 296 players picked because he wanted to be on top of. He did all that because of his fantasy football league, and he always won, and he won a lot of money. But that's yeah. Some of those fans are a little over. I can't do that. I'm a fan, but I can't tell you. The starting lineup for my favorite team. I can't tell you the record right off the top of my head. Whereas some of these guys, they'll sit there and just, yep, 1965, this guy's batting average was, just spout out stats. I'm not that into it. I enjoy it. It's kind of escape, kind of how you mentioned before. We get to live vicariously through them. So yeah, you just kind of attach yourself to a team, and I've got a friend who he doesn't understand how I'm a fan of a city or a team where I never lived in. He picks his teams based off of where he lives, and that's who he roots for. But other people, it's amazing to see how much they'll just dive into it and claim their team and stick with them, and they live and die by it. It's sad to a point. It's on how much if their team makes a bad trade. I had worked with the guy a few years back that their team made a bad trade, didn't like. He cried. I mean, here's a grown man crying because his team
I've seen that
has absolutely no impact on himself. There's an economic impact that will impact him as well, but nothing directly. That they cry because of something irrelevant. That's all I've got to say on that one.
What I always found interesting.
Who did you cry over?
I've never cried over a team.
Oh, I thought you said you've done that.
No.
Okay. All right, your points just went back up in my book. I had to deduct some for you.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
But
now that I know you didn't cry over.
What I learned interesting growing up was I started tutoring and helping special needs kids early on in my career, the later part of my high school and early in college. And I always found it interesting because boys in general have a higher rate of what you call disabilities, whether it's ADHD or it's dyslexia, it's learning disabilities. And then I discovered as I started helping kids that they couldn't do certain things within school that involved mathematics or memorizations, but when it came to sports, they were on point. Like they knew how to memorize teams and, like you said, players and stats, and then they could calculate different things based off of batting averages or records of free throws, averages. They could calculate different first downs and second downs and who was moving into what position and what particular plays worked. And I always found that fascinating.
Right.
That was when I first discovered that motivation was huge when it came to your learning curve, and that it wasn't necessarily you weren't smart. It was the way that we were teaching in school and education that if it lacked something enjoyable, such as sports, then the child just wasn't interested. And so that was one of my first discoveries, especially with boys and men later on, is that sports was a way for them to stay somewhat intelligent. So it's where people usually associate, a guy that's like super into sports as not being the sharpest tool in the shed, I started to learn that that wasn't really true. And the same of my brothers. My brothers were both in special education growing up, my two older brothers, and they, couldn't write for the life of them. Their writing was horrible. They couldn't do English, but through sports and through things that motivated them or that they found enjoyable, like construction and land development and reading plans, they were geniuses. Both of them went on to be millionaires, multimillionaires, and I always just found that interesting, and they still fill the majority of their time with sports. So if they're not doing something involving construction with building, it's revolved around the sports bars that they own or the bookies and the gambling that they do. And so I learned that was a form of intelligence for them, that they found it to be enjoyable to root for a team, to understand stats like fantasy football. They're big into that. I still don't know how fantasy football works. But I just always found that fascinating that there is a level of intelligence to being involved in sports.
Yeah, it's I can see how I mean, it's just an escape. It's the kind of the rush of, I don't even know how you say a rush, but it's. For me, there's nothing like it. Of just going out there. Now, the people who grew up and didn't play any sports, I don't know what the driving force. If that's just they got tired of it, they don't want to do it, or they were never interested. So I don't know. I can see how they, like I said earlier, they find their vice. They find what really intrigues them, and if it's a form of relaxation. So I think. If you're treating your mind right and you're giving it some relaxing time and enjoyable time, it'll function a lot more correctly whenever it's time to focus on your job or whatever's the task at hand. So I'd be interested to see if there's a little correlation on that one.
Well, that's what I've always found fascinating about like couples when I do couples therapy is. You just said that they can focus on sports, but they won't put an effort or a time into making their marriage work or the attention on their girlfriend's needs. So I have seen people in my professional career complain about men being hyper-focused on sports and that it takes up too much of their time, where it does become problematic. And then I think it's rare to find a woman that's just as much into sports. They do exist, and they're, I think, far and few between, but sports oftentimes can turn into an issue, an obsession.
It can, but I would be interested in knowing from your family therapies of the ones where they said my husband is too involved in sports, and that's driving us, and that's causing arguments. I'd be interested to know what is too much sports? Because that's all going to be a personal level. Too much sports for a non-sports person is 1 hour a week, a month, or whatever. But someone who understands it and stuff, and they go, well, what's 10 hours or what's a couple games a week? I would also be interested. So anyway, that would be that's the level. So that's always a moving target there.
It could even be the 1 hour a week. It could be the 1 hour a week, because what happens in a female mind is when your husband or your boyfriend, you have such few time together, especially in today's society where we're working all the time, and they come home and they're not interested in their spouse's or their significant other's day, but they're interested in what team won for the day or the week, or they're scheduling time to go out with the boys to do something sports related, as opposed to scheduling a time to be with their. So it doesn't have to be an obsession. Right, I just think it's that overall.
Well, it could, but what about if they're getting upset about the time spent on sports? I'd 100%. I'd bet my next paycheck on it that it's not only about the sports. And if you look into it, they're not even scheduling other time together. It's just they'll have dinner together if they're home, or if they happen to pass each other in the kitchen. So I think it's easy to make sports a scapegoat because people don't like to admit their faults in themselves, especially when it comes to like the family therapy side of it. It's a lot easier to blame something else than say, sure, maybe I'm not scheduling enough time, maybe I'm not opening up and saying, hey, let's plan time together. So if you get any partner, whether it's a husband or a wife, that uses that as their scapegoat of they're blaming it on he spends too much time on sports, charge them double, first of all, because she's stupid. That just she's not willing to look at everything else and say it. But yeah, I would say if that's the issue, then look at their schedule. I guarantee you they're not going to do anything together. They don't. A lot of folks, if they implemented one date night a week, a standing date, sports probably wouldn't be an issue because they knew they had their partner's attention for that night for sure, and that's something to look forward to on both sides, not just the women, but it gives the guys something to look forward to. So, yeah, sports as a don't blame sports, people.
So I have one last question before we wrap it up. What do you think it is with in the sports arena? Part of, I think, the gender issue is people just don't value women's sports as much as men. So women's sports aren't really looked at as being substantial or relevant as well as a man's sport is. And I think the WNBA kind of speaks to that. Is they're the first essential, analogous sports, because you have women's sports like beach volleyball and women's golf, women's soccer, but they're just not. Why do you think that watching women play sports isn't as relevant as watching men's sports? And yet this is the issue, is that the men will watch women if it involves something sexual, but they won't watch a woman if it involves them being competitive in athleticism.
Well, we're not watching them to be competitive. We're watching for excitement. And if they're competitive, that's a bonus. And I'm not sure if you've ever watched any women's sports at all. I just don't find it exciting. It's not WNBA. People don't go because they're not as fast as the men. They're not exciting as the men. You don't have the alley-oops and I mean, they may run just as fast, but it's not exciting. It's softball would be the closest to coming to saying watching girls play a sport is exciting. That didn't involve you mentioned beach volleyball or golf. Well, they're wearing sexy outfits and bikinis and whatnot, so men are going to watch. We don't care what they're playing at that point. We're just watching the bikinis. But if the women's sports were more exciting, sure, let's do it. We're all for equality. Let's make it equal. But if you're also talking about a marketplace, it's driven by money, and we're voting with our dollars that women's sports are just not as exciting. It's not exciting to watch women do really anything. No offense, ladies, I'm sorry, but there's very, very few things I would want to watch a women's league in. Maybe if it was a co-ed, that's fine. It's a little more exciting, but there's just absolutely nothing exciting to it, and that's why that's why you don't get a lot of.
I would disagree with that though. Like I don't. If you take certain sports,
then you haven't watched women play sports.
Soccer, like women's soccer, they're just as competitive. The movements, they're just the same. If you look at, I love watching Glow, gorgeous ladies of wrestling.
You keep using competitive. It's not about competitive. They're really competitive with each other in the thing. But if you put a WNBA team against an NBA team, it won't be competitive at all. They will compete, but it won't be competitive because the women are not. It's not as exciting to watch. They're not going to be throwing the alley oops. They're not even going to be throwing any types of dunks. You may see a good steal or a good block.
That's just basketball, though. In soccer,
it has nothing.
That's just basketball.
But it has nothing to do with competitive. It has to do with excitement. You could do. There's a lot of things that fishing is competitive, and unfortunately, they call that a sport. But there's nothing exciting about fishing. Sorry, Tony. I know you're watching. I know you love fishing, but I get the legality of why they call it a sport because you're living off of it. You're getting paid for it, but and it's not a typical job.
I'm looking at what sports really means.
What sports means?
Yeah, like what defines a sport? Because you said fishing isn't a sport.
It might have been best to lead with that question.
Okay. So the definition of sports includes any competitive physical activity or game. So wouldn't that technically make almost everything a sport? I mean, chess would be a sport. It's competitive, and it involves physical activity of moving a pawn. Or a queen.
Right.
Or a king. So fishing would be considered a sport.
So is beer pong. But that's I guess you can make everything a sport.
So you would call beer pong a sport, but fishing not a sport.
Yeah. But after you win enough at beer pong, you'll be the person going fishing. Because I'm just kidding. I love fishing myself. I like it because it's boring and you can just relax and pretend you're doing something. And I don't know how to fish very well. So,
what sports are relaxing?
What?
What sports are relaxing?
Well, fishing, of course. I get if you're using the actual definition of sports, then I guess we'd have to throw chess and stuff in there too.
Golf?
I don't know. Golf's not relaxing for me. It is the first 3 holes, and then after that I get real angry and upset because I stink, and I remember why I quit playing. But I think at times, it's any sport that I guess to some, soccer, baseball, basketball, playing the sport could be relaxing because if it eases your mind, I think that's what makes it relaxing.
But then doesn't that take away your thought that about it's excitement? Because if golf is relaxing. I mean, there's not like an energetic, physical contact to it. It's obviously when you're swinging and you're trying to get it, par 4 or a birdie or whatever you're trying to get, but it's still relaxing. Golf is one of those sports where people drink when they're playing it.
Wow, you got me now. But first, I was referring to the excitement of I forget. Never mind. I forgot what you were wording, what you said, and how I was going to word it. Take 2.
Well, we were talking about why men's sports is more preferable to watch, and the reason was excitement.
Oh, yeah.
I think the true excitement comes with winning or losing, like chess. It's about who's winning and who's losing. That, I think, defines the competitive interaction about being better, hitting the ball farther, hitting the ball faster, getting to the opposite sides of the court. I think that the triumph of it.
Agreed.
What is the most watched
You
women's
said that
sports?
well too. So,
what is the most watched women's?
I would probably say PGA, LPGA, or tennis.
That's your guess? Golf or tennis?
Or golf or tennis, and then I would throw in.
I would say it's soccer.
Like beach volleyball, huh?
I thought of, actually, yeah. So the order is number 1 is soccer of women's sports. You were right about the softball. Then it's basketball, golf, horse racing, and lacrosse.
I would not have expected golf to be that low.
Number 4.
What did you put that at? What was that, like 6?
No, it was, so number 1 is soccer, then it's softball,
Right.
basketball, and golf. Golf is number 4.
Okay. Yeah, I would have expected that to be top 3, but oh well.
I
I'm a
figured
man.
it
I'm
was
always
soccer.
wrong, right?
I figured it was soccer just because.
Yeah, but I wonder if that's just. Well, that makes sense because soccer is worldwide, and don't they have women's leagues in other countries, or is it all predominantly all only men as well?
No, yeah, it is, but I
Because
also think soccer fans are fanatics. Soccer fans are crazy.
Right,
I
right.
think
So
they get the most wild.
Yeah, but that's a worldwide thing. So if your soccer fan base, that's why I was asking about women's leagues. If there's women's leagues worldwide, or does the U.S. only have the only women's league out there? Because if there's more women's leagues around the world and it's such a global thing, it would make sense that it would be the most watched because it's a global game. But yeah,
hold on, I gotta wrap up the radio show. I got 20 seconds.
Oh, okay.
So, thank you to all my amazing listeners at Armed Radio on iHeart. And I'm your host, Professor Jamie Lynn, with my co-host, Andy Cookman, tonight on What Is It with Sports. So thank you so much, and have a wonderful rest of the week. Okay. So that's the end of that.
Clear.
And done. So before we wrap up on the Facebook Live, the interesting thing I found, though, is the most popular sport watched around the world for women is the Olympics, gymnastics. So
really?
That's super fast.
Wow.
Yeah. So soccer is number 1 when it comes to like global engagement, but the most watched, if you take one particular sporting event, it's the gymnastics for the Olympics.
Well, I can see that. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It all culminates.
So thanks
to that
for joining me tonight.
Sure. Glad to.
I appreciate
Glad
you.
to be here. And thank you, RCC folks, for chiming in.
Yes, thank you, folks.
Is that it? Are you done?
Yeah, we're done.
Oh,
I hope
nice.
you have a really great rest
All
of the
right, well,
night.
it's time for me to go hit a bar.
Well, I'm going to the gym. See?
I'm just kidding. Well, I'm going to do some 12-ounce curls. Anybody in Northwest Arkansas, visit Bike Rack Brewing.
Okay.
Great
you
stuff.
have
I'll
fun
see you
with
there
that.
tonight. All right, bye, girl.
Thanks. You too. Bye.
She's just a girl and she's on fire, hotter than a fantasy, lonely like a highway. She's living in a world and it's on fire, filled with catastrophe, but she knows she can fly away.